Before we begin, I want to take a moment to honor the cultures behind the stories we are about to explore. The tales shared here come from many peoples, lands, and traditions. I do not change these stories to fit modern expectations or to align with today's social standards. Instead, I present them as they were told, sometimes beautiful, sometimes harsh, sometimes challenging. We are not here to judge the past, but to understand it, to listen, to learn, and to honor the ancestors who carried these stories forward. We also share stories from various religious traditions. These are presented in their historical and spiritual context, with respect for their beliefs that they represent. Every culture deserves respect, context, and acknowledgement, and this space is dedicated to doing exactly that. August 17th, the baptism. Story 1, the Sedrapushi, when the child takes responsibility. In the ancient religious traditions of Iran, fire was never simply something that burned. Within Zoroastrianism, fire became one of the great visible symbols associated with purity, truth, and Asha, the divine order that stands against falsehood and chaos. For a Zoroastrian child growing toward adulthood, however, belonging to that tradition eventually required something more than being born into a family that practiced it. There came a moment when the prayers, garments, and responsibilities of the faith became their own, marked in Iran by an initiation ceremony known as Sedrapushi, meaning the putting on of the sacred shirt. Before the ceremony, the young initiate learned essential prayers that would become part of a religious life after initiation. A priest performed a ritual purification, preparing the child for the investiture that followed. Then came two objects that would remain important long after the celebration ended. First was the sedra, a white sacred undershirt. Around it was placed the kusti, a sacred cord worn around the waist. The kusti is traditionally composed of 72 threads woven into 6 strands, and it is wrapped 3 times around the body before being tied. Over centuries, those 3 turns came to be associated with one of the best-known expressions of Zoroastrian ethics: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. The initiate was not merely being dressed for a ceremony. According to Zoroastrian ritual tradition, receiving the sedra and kusti gave the young person ritual agency and marked the point at which they became responsible for their own religious actions. The priest assisted the initiate in performing their first public prayer while wearing the sacred garments, and concluded the ceremony with a blessing called Tendorosti. From that point forward, the kusti could be untied and retied during daily prayer, repeatedly renewing the commitment first made at initiation. Fire belonged to the larger sacred world surrounding this transformation. Long before dedicated fire temples became central institutions, the household hearth itself served as an important religious focus, and fire and water became fundamental elements of Zoroastrian ritual practice. A worshiper might face the sun, a lamp, the moon, the stars, or fire while performing prayers associated with the kusti, turning toward light as a visible focus for devotion. This is also why the old description of Zoroastrians as simply fire worshippers is misleading. The flame is not worshipped as a god. It is honored as a sacred creation and powerful symbol within worship directed toward Ahura Mazda. The Sedrapushi, therefore, did not ask a young person to prove themselves by surviving fire or physically passing through flames. Its initiation was quieter and perhaps more demanding. After learning what faith required, the initiate publicly accepted responsibility for living it. The child entered wearing ordinary clothing and emerged girdled with a cord they would tie again and again throughout life. Each tying returned them to the choices represented by good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Nothing needed to burn for the initiation to transform them. The sacred fire could remain before them, steady and bright, while the person standing in its light became someone newly responsible for the path they chose to walk. Story 2, Buol Tine, between the two fires. When winter finally loosened its grip upon Ireland and the green world prepared for summer, the ancient Irish marked the threshold with fire. The festival was Buíochmh Tine, celebrated at the beginning of May and remembered as one of the great seasonal turning points of the Gaelic year. This was the moment when livestock could be moved towards summer pasture, when longer days returned to the land, and when communities sought protection for the living things upon which their survival depended. Medieval Irish sources preserve one extraordinary custom at the heart of the festival. 2 fires were kindled, and cattle were driven between them. The smoke and heat were believed to protect the animals from disease during the coming year. Rather than being offered to the flames, the cattle passed safely through the space between them, crossing a fiery boundary from one season into another. One of the places most deeply associated with Buíochmh Tine is the hill of Uisneach in County Westmeath, a site regarded in Irish traditions as the sacred center of the island. The medieval Din Shenchas, the lore of places, preserves a story explaining that the druid name, Mida, kindled a great fire at Uisneach that burned for 7 years. And from this fire, other principal fires were said to have been lit. Later tradition connected Uisneach strongly with the great Buíochmh Tine fire, imagining flames spreading outward from Ireland's symbolic center as communities welcomed the bright half of the year. Household hearths could be extinguished and kindled anew from festival fire, allowing the transition to enter the home itself. The old flame belonged to the season that had ended. The new flame entered with summer. Fire also became part of a wider world of protective customs. Yellow flowers could be placed around homes, wells, and livestock, while May dew, sacred wells, food offerings, and other practices became woven into later Irish Buíochmh Tine folklore. The threshold between seasons was treated as a moment of possibility but also of vulnerability, a time when people took deliberate steps to protect the household and herd before entering the months ahead. Yet the image of the 2 fires remains especially powerful because the animals were required to move. Protection did not come from remaining where they had spent the winter. The herd passed between smoke and flame because another season required another landscape. Beyond the fires waited pasture, growth, milk, calves, work, and the unpredictable months of summer. Behind them lay the dark half of the year. Buíochmh Tine transformed that ordinary seasonal movement into ceremony. A community gathered, fires rose, smoke crossed the path, and living creatures stepped through the narrow space between them. Nothing needed to be destroyed. The fire marked a boundary. On one side stood what had been, on the other waited what was beginning, and one by one the herd crossed through. Story 3, The 7 Steps Before Agni. Before 2 people leave a Hindu wedding ceremony as husband and wife, many traditions ask them to stand before a witness older than either family gathered around them. Agni, the sacred fire. Within Vedic religion, Agni is the divine power of flame and the messenger who carries offerings toward the gods. And for thousands of years, fire has remained at the center of many Hindu rites of passage. In the wedding ceremony known broadly as Vivaha, a carefully prepared sacred fire burns while prayers, offerings, vows, and blessings surround the couple. The bride and groom do not simply exchange promises privately with one another. Their vows are spoken before Agni, whose flame becomes witness to the new relationship being created. Customs vary across India, but one of the most enduring wedding rites is Saptapadi, the 7 steps. Guided by the priest, the couple takes 7 steps together near or around the sacred fire, each movement accompanied by prayers concerning the life they are beginning. Traditional formations invoke nourishment, strength, prosperity, happiness, family, harmony, and lasting companionship. The steps are small, but their meaning is enormous. 2 people who approach the fire as members of separate households begin walking from it as partners expected to share responsibilities through an entire life. In many North Indian ceremonies, the couple also performs feras, circling Agni while sacred verses are recited. Other Hindu communities arrange the movements differently, and the number or order of circuits can vary, but the principle remains recognizable. Fire stands at the center while human identity changes around it. Offerings of clarified butter, grains, or other sacred substances may be placed into the flames, allowing Agni to carry the ritual outward into the divine realm. The fire does not merely decorate the marriage, it marks a threshold. Before the ceremony, the bride and groom belong to one pattern of obligations. Afterward, another set begins. Families become linked. A new household may be established. Decisions that once belonged to one person increasingly become shared. Even the language of the rite recognizes that marriage is not created by feeling alone. It must be walked. One step follows another, just as 1 year follows another after the wedding music has ended. The flames before them will eventually be extinguished, but the commitments witnessed there are intended to continue far beyond the ceremony. This is why Agni is such a fitting presence at initiation into married life. Fire transforms whatever enters it, and the wedding asks the couple to accept a transformation of their own. Neither person is meant to disappear inside the union, yet both emerge carrying a new identity in addition to the ones they already possess. The 7 steps make that change visible. No leap is required. No ordeal of heat must be survived. The transformation happens through movement, vow, and witness. One person beside another, stepping deliberately into a life that did not exist before they began to walk. Story 4. The New Fire Ceremony. Every 52 years, the Meshika believed the great calendars completed a cycle together, and with that completion came a terrifying possibility. What if the sun did not rise again? Time itself seemed to reach a threshold. The old cycle had ended, but the new one had not yet begun. Across the Meshika world, household fires were extinguished, hearths went dark, temples lost their flames. Families waited in uncertainty while priests prepared for one of the most important ceremonies of the age, the new fire ceremony, known, Nahuatl, as Shiomol Pili, often translated as the binding of the years. The rite took place on a hill called Wishanch Tlan, later associated with the Hill of the Star near the basin of Mexico. There, priests watched the night sky for a crucial celestial sign. When the Pleiades reached the proper position and passed the zenith, it signaled that the heavens had not collapsed and that the cosmic cycle could continue. Then came the act upon which the renewal of the world was believed to depend. A sacrificial victim was placed upon the ritual platform, and priests kindled a new fire upon his chest using a fire drill. When the flame successfully caught, the danger had passed. The universe had not ended. The new cycle had begun. From that single sacred flame, runners carried fire outward to temples, neighborhoods, and homes throughout the region. Hearth after hearth was rekindled. Families who had spent the night in darkness could once again cook, warm their homes, light sacred spaces, and begin ordinary life beneath the renewed sun. The ceremony was enormous in scale because the symbolism was enormous. Fire was not simply being restarted after a practical interruption. The entire world was being ritually restarted with it. Old household objects could be discarded or replaced, and the renewal of flame coincided with the renewal of time itself. The ceremony tied astronomy, religion, sacrifice, community, and domestic life into one great act of transition. What had existed before belonged to the completed cycle. The flame now entering the home came from a world newly permitted to continue. This is one reason Meshika fire traditions cannot be reduced to simple symbolism. The hearth connected cosmic order with everyday survival. The same element that burned in a temple also cooked food. The same fire whose rebirth signaled the continuation of the universe eventually glowed inside ordinary homes. In that sense, initiation occurred at every scale. Priests crossed a cosmic threshold. Communities crossed a calendrical one. Families received a new flame. Even the household itself became part of the beginning. The darkness before the ceremony made the transformation visible. Nothing had to be imagined. The old fires were gone. The city waited. Then one flame appeared upon the hill. and from it thousands of others were born. When dawn followed, the world looked familiar, but ritually it was not the same world that had gone dark the night before. Daily Thread for August 17th. Who am I now? There comes a point after an ending when the question changes. Yesterday, we stood in the ashes and asked what might grow from what had been lost. Today, something has already begun to rise. Initiation is a threshold where we acknowledge that we cannot enter every new chapter as the person we were before it began. Today's traditions mark that threshold with fire, sacred clothing, deliberate steps, extinguished hearths, and flames kindled again. In the Zoroastrian Sedrapushi, a young person receives the sacred Sedra and Kusti and accepts greater responsibility for a faith that had previously been carried around them by parents and community. The person does not walk through literal flames, but enters a religious life in which sacred fire and light continually represent truth, purity, and the responsibility to choose good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. At Bealtaine, cattle pass between two fires as Gaelic communities cross from the dark half of the year into summer. The herd could not remain forever in winter pastures simply because winter was familiar. The season had changed, and eventually the living had to move with it. Before Agni, Hindu couples take sacred steps into marriage, approaching the fire as individuals and leaving with a relationship and responsibilities that did not exist in quite the same form before the ceremony. Their transformation is accomplished not by standing before the threshold and contemplating it forever, but by stepping. And in the Meshika new fire ceremony, an entire 52-year cycle was allowed to end. Old hearths went dark. Communities waited while priests watched the heavens. Then, one new flame was kindled and carried outward until homes and temples burned again beneath a world that had entered another cycle. Each tradition understands initiation differently, but all four recognize something we often resist. There are moments when becoming requires participation. We can spend years saying we are healing, changing, beginning, leaving, becoming, or preparing. Eventually, there comes a threshold that cannot be crossed through intention alone. We have to put on the garment, walk between the fires, take the step, light the new flame. And afterward comes today's uncomfortable question. Who am I now? We often know ourselves through old descriptions. I am the person who went through that. I am the person who failed at this. I am the person who stayed. I am the person who left. I am the person they thought I was. I am the person I needed to become to survive that chapter. Those identities may once have been completely true. Some may even have saved us. But initiation asks whether they are still the whole truth. Perhaps the person standing here now knows something the former you did not. Perhaps your boundaries have changed. Perhaps your ambitions have changed. Perhaps what once frightened you no longer controls you, or what once satisfied you no longer does. Becoming does not require rejecting every earlier version of yourself. The person you were brought you to the threshold. The person you are becoming must decide what happens after you cross it. So today, name yourself without beginning with your history. Not what happened to you, not what you lost, not what someone called you. Ask instead, what do I choose now? What do I protect now? What do I believe now? What am I willing to build now? Maybe the answer is still forming. Initiations rarely provide a map for everything that follows. They simply make one fact undeniable. The threshold is behind you. The old hearth has gone dark. The new fire is already burning. You are allowed to meet the person standing beside it. You do not have to keep introducing yourself as the person who entered the fire. At some point, you get to discover the person who walked out.